What makes an essay first class? If you're new here, my name's Francis. I'm a doctorate student in clinical psychology at Oxford University. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to write first class essays by going through 3 worked examples I wrote during my undergrad at Cambridge. Although these are psychology essays, which would be particularly useful if you study psychology, the principles I'm going to draw out are very general and I think can be applied to any subject at uni. Essentially, this video is going to cover the whole essay writing process, the planning stage, introduction, main body, and conclusion. So let's begin. I'm someone who's tried both planning an essay as I went along, literally writing one paragraph, then planning the next paragraph. And I've also tried planning the whole essay before writing anything. After giving both of these techniques a pretty substantial go, I can safely say that planning the whole essay before writing it works a lot better because you're doing the hard bit first, getting your head around the literature, thinking about how you're going to get to your conclusion. On the other hand, it does feel nice to write and plan at the same time because it feels like you're getting somewhere quicker, but you end up arriving at the same problem you'd have if you just plan the whole essay beforehand, which is, what am I actually going to argue here? And once you have decided what you're arguing in the planning and writing at the same time style, you probably have to go back and edit what you've already written to fit the argument you've just come up with. So actually, I think it takes longer overall than just planning the essay from the start. So how did I plan my essays at Cambridge? I will firstly open a big fat Word document, and we shall call this document plan. And then we will have 4 headings to this plan: slides, readings,
extra reading, final plan.
So the first step is to go through the lecture slides and copy and paste any bullet points that seem relevant to the title, making sure to note the sources if there are any mentioned, any pictures that could also help your understanding of fair game at this point too. So here's one I made earlier for autism. As you can see, we're just talking about the prevalence and comorbidities with autism. Essentially, I've gone through all the leckies and copied and pasted whatever. In another example in my essay plan of Are We Living in a Post-Truth Society? I've also gone through a total of 8 lectures and just copied and pasted anything I thought was relevant. So this one had only this sentence was relevant. Lecture 3, completely irrelevant. So essentially what we're doing is building up a bit of an encyclopedia. I think it's important to be quite generous with what you include. Like, putting something in this document doesn't mean that it will definitely be in the final plan, but could be useful to refer back to when you are writing that plan. The second step is to go through the reading list provided by your course and any sources you might have identified in the slides, download them all and create a subheading for each reading on the Word document. We're going to go through the readings and copy and paste anything relevant to the essay title onto the Word document. As you can see from this section of my Post-Truth Society essay plan, I have taken each reading from the reading list and then just copied and pasted anything that I thought was relevant. Because there are so many readings, I normally just skim them by looking at the abstract, and then if it's relevant and I have time, the introduction and the discussion sections. The methods section, I'm not really as bothered about. So this paper was a banger. There was quite a lot relevant there. And I'm just getting it all down, not really thinking about how it might fall into an essay, but just, is it relevant to the question? You can tell I copied and pasted this from a PDF because of all these line breaks. If you do have something like this, here's a little hack. So if we go to replace here on the home tab and under find, you want to put up arrow P, which basically means an enter key. And then you want to replace with a space. And if you click replace all, it deletes all the line breaks. For every reading throughout this process, it's very important to put it on a reference manager like Zotero or Mendeley, or on this later. The third step of my planning is to do some extra reading for that original kind of spice to your essay. And we can do this in 3 ways. So the first one is, you see these square brackets in my autism essay plan, and these brackets can only mean one thing for the source of this information. Wikipedia is class, I'm not going to lie. Provided you don't actually cite Wikipedia itself in your essays, it can be great to cite the sources of the information, which typically are relevant books or academic papers. It's just great for finding definitions or just getting an understanding of some key concepts. Another hack is, if you scroll down a Wikipedia article, you'll see that there is a language that, if you know English, you already know. Simple English Wikipedia. Just whenever there's a topic that normal Wikipedia is a bit too confusing, I could just go on the simple English version and someone has written it in the dumbest possible terms. The second way of doing some original reading is by using the papers in your reading list, and from reading those, either working backwards to some papers that those papers have cited, or working forwards by going into Google Scholar and seeing papers that have cited that paper in the reading list. For example, Del Vicario 2016, Echo Chambers. And this is the paper, so we can see that it's cited by 495 other papers. If we go on that, then you have a bunch of papers that you can then read, which have cited a paper on your reading list. It's kind of a good way to find relevant papers to your essay title, but you can also just do a general search of post-truth society, maybe misinformation for this essay title, and then setting the custom range to within the last 5 years. And you will get some interesting papers and you can incorporate those. So doing the same thing, going through the abstracts, the introduction, discussion if you need, just to get the key points and get them onto this big Word document. So eventually you have information from the slides, information from the reading list, and information from your additional reading, which hopefully is enough to formulate a final plan, the last subheading in my planning Word document. And obviously this is the hardest step, to arrange all the information into one beautiful essay plan. But the good thing is, with this massive Word document, you hopefully don't have to venture back onto the internet too many times to create a plan. You can just use what you've collated. So under the heading for final plan, I'll create a subheading for introduction, and then 3 or 4 paragraphs, main points that I'm going to discuss in my essay, thinking about what I'm eventually going to conclude. I'm literally just copying and pasting from above in the Word document. I will go on my reading here, and then I'll go up to the View tab. New window. So now you're viewing the same Word document in 2 different windows. Now you can sort of, on this window, go down to the plan, and then you could literally copy and paste it into this paragraph, for example. It's all within the same document. So I'm just copying and pasting from above in the document, and then maybe adding a couple of sentences about how I'm going to tie this evidence together into a coherent paragraph. Obviously, these are very tailored to the essay titles, but the important thing is I have an idea what I'm going to conclude and why I'm going to conclude it. So let's move on to the finished essays and see how I translated these plans into their final written prose. There are 4 key components, I think, to a good introduction. First one is definitions, so explaining the keywords of the title. With my autism essay, I obviously define what autism is. The question almost pertains to what the definition is. So I also talk about the history of the diagnosis. And I also define what I mean by theory. If we look at the Post-Truth Society essay, I define what post-truth means, and that's basically it. And in my essay about bullying, I define what bullying is and what a bully victim is. The second component of a good introduction is the conclusion. What are we going to argue? And I think this is a big step I took from school to university, is the transition to starting your essays with what you're going to conclude at the end, as opposed to saying, here's a debate, who knows what's going to happen, let's find out. You're going in, informing the reader, this is what I'm arguing, and this is how I'm going to get there. If there is one thing you take away from this video, it should be signposting. I need you to signpost the out of your essays. We do this throughout the essay, but in the introduction, it's about saying literally what are the paragraphs you're going to write. The following essay will explore from multiple perspectives why this group is of particular concern to professionals, the existence is associated with peer rejection, a symptom of wider problems, etc., etc. The following essay will illustrate the impact of the internet and other forms of media on how we obtain news and argue there are certain post-truth phenomena indeed taking place with wide behavioural effects. I love saying the following essay. The following essay will explore how the difficulty of pinning a unifying theory behind autism lies in the heterogeneity of its symptoms. Cognitive theories which attempt to parsimoniously bridge the heterogeneity of biological markers with the heterogeneity of autistic behaviours face a near impossible task. That is the plan. The fourth and final component of a good introduction is importance, and I think this is the one that's pretty slept on, is saying why the essay is important, not just in the context of completing your degree, but to society. Like, why bother writing this essay? So in the Post-Truth Society essay, I mentioned that post-truth is the 2016 word of the year. In the autism essay, I mentioned the mental health problems, lower quality of life, and high suicide rates associated with autism. The bullying essay question almost asks you to explore the importance of the topic throughout the essay. So that was probably a bit different, where I didn't directly state this is why it's important, but I did mention the prevalence of it, as well as, by highlighting what I'm going to discuss, ultimately highlights the importance of the title. So there is a little bit of flexibility to applying these principles. But wait, why are these references grey when I click on them? That's because I used a reference manager. I use Zotero, which is free, but there are plenty of other options out there, and it's just about finding your preference. There is only one reason to use a reference manager, and it's at the end of your essay when you finish writing it and you just want to submit it. I have been using APA formatting for 5 years and I still have no idea how to do it. I just get the reference manager to do it for me. Basically, when you're getting the readings on Google Scholar, if we try and cite this paper, for example, if you click cite, it shows you how to reference an APA if you did want to copy and paste that, but we live in the 21st century, so we don't need to do that anymore. We can download the reference. So we might click RefMan. Any reference manager will get you to install a Chrome extension. So this has a Zotero connector. So I will allow the import into Zotero, and it has now saved that reference to my library, which is a big fat collection at this point from my master's and undergrad. I have no idea where the reference just went, but what does happen is, if I did want to add a citation, I would go to my essay, and then wherever I wanted to add it, I'd click on the Zotero tab, add edit citation, and then you just type in Lewandowski. So I've already added this to my Zotero, which is why there is 2 copies, but click on that, enter, and now it is done, and it can form part of your reference list at the end. It will remember all of the references that you have added if you do it in this way. You can assign a shortcut to this add edit citation button, which makes it flow a lot better to write essay instead of clicking around. I've set it to Alt Z. And you can also abbreviate the citation. If you click on it and select omit author, then it will just show the year, which is good if you just want to mention the author's name in text. And that's the crash course in Zotero. So in the planning stage, you download your references and insert them into Zotero. And then when writing the essay, when you need to add a citation, you just use the Zotero Word tab to add it. And then at the end, now we can move on to the main body of the essay. This is where the essay plan comes good, because writing an essay is really easy to get lost in unnecessary detail and just irrelevant stuff. So for every paragraph, we're going to signpost, stating what the paragraph is arguing, bearing in mind the broad point we're trying to make at the broad thrust of the essay. Then we're going to P everywhere. Then we're going to signpost linking back to the essay title. So let's pull out a paragraph from each essay to explain what I mean. In my post-truth society essay, I've kind of gone back and forth. So here's an argument against the fact we're living in a post-truth society. I've signposted there, and I've signposted there. In this paragraph, I'm arguing for the fact we're in a post-truth society, and I've signposted that the internet brings increased potential for the creation and dissemination of false information, and it can spread far quicker than the truth. At the end of the paragraph, I signpost again back to the essay title that these points create a bleak picture for the post-truth society that much of the population would be largely content with. I do this throughout the essay. The biggest testament to a post-truth society is that revealing the truth largely does not make a behavioral difference. And then I've tried to P, so P stands for point, evidence, explanation, and it's just a useful way of thinking about writing your paragraphs. I don't follow it to the letter completely all the time, but good to bear in mind. So if we take this as the point, revealing the truth does not make a behavioral difference. We cite evidence of this study. So my study voted intentions for the 2016 presidential election before and after exposing participants to facts with or without corrections at a later date. With support for Trump beforehand, misinformation was believed more. While the effects of correction were initially positive, people started to forget them 1 week later. No change in intentions or feelings towards Trump. So my explanation is, in providing a correction to misinformation, the misinformation must be repeated, which inadvertently strengthens the memory and lends itself to the familiarity heuristic, making the information appear reliable. And then I've kind of linked it into further evidence by saying that maybe this explains why a detailed debunking of false information appears more effective than a non-detailed one, but it creates a stronger misinformation persistence effect. And then I've almost preempted sort of a counter-argument in that maybe these samples are just US based with the US presidential election. So I've preempted it by saying that this isn't an issue just for the US. Here's a study with the French voters, and yes, my autism essay. I think the thing with this essay is that it does require more kind of definitions and concept explanation, because we're just going through various theories. The main value of the essay is in the criticism of the literature and trying to incorporate something original as opposed to explaining what the concepts are. So I've tried to be concise. I think with this procedure here, this is one that measures something called false belief understanding. I tried to do it in 3 sentences, but I could have easily dedicated a paragraph to explaining this. In any essay, we have to explain the concepts involved and maybe what happened in the studies that you're citing. This is important to set the scene, but it should be done ideally in a concise way because the examiner knows what you're talking about already. Another thing I did in this essay, the question being, can the symptoms be explained by a single theory? I've questioned whether that is something we should aspire to. I've cited evidence that, for example, Happe et al. Investigated the DSM-5 triad of autism symptoms and found that less extreme forms of them are inherited independently in the general population. So based on genetic inheritance, it's a futile exercise to try to identify one cause of all the autism symptoms because at a minimum, there are three. The idea of a one theory, one treatment fits all approach is therefore quite unfeasible for this condition. Another way I've shown originality in my essay about bullying was to bring in a discussion that wasn't in the reading, which was cyberbullying. And I've done the same peeing thing. So the point being, further concern is warranted. Here's some evidence that bully victims in cyberspace have low quality family communication and poor family climate. And so my explanation is, if family communication was already poor enough that parents had a difficulty discovering in-person bullying, then such parents may have an even harder time discovering incidences of cyberbullying. And to be critical in a final way, I've highlighted how the literature in this field is still limited. So in this case, there's not been a discussion of bully victims in sexual cyberbullying behavior. Essentially, if I try and tie all of this evidence together into a single point, ironically, this whole video is actually an essay. Essentially, with the main body in each paragraph, we are signposting at the start and end as much as we can to link back to the original question and think about the broad argument you're trying to make. And then peeing, so making a point, backing it up with scientific evidence, and then explaining what needs to be explained further, but also shows originality and adds a bit of that critical thinking in, thinking about the methodology of studies that don't exist yet and where the literature could go, as well as attacking the question. And as I've alluded to, the internet is full of resources that can give you the extra edge in your studies, which leads me to the sponsor of today's video, Brilliant. Brilliant is a website offering a number of online STEM courses featuring maths, science, and computer science. Recently, I've been doing the Algorithm Fundamentals course to brush up on my problem-solving skills, and honestly, I wish I'd used something like this when I was younger. Brilliant's courses are great for two things. First, building up your knowledge in the subject from the ground up, introducing you to complex concepts in a way that's extremely palatable, and second, the courses keep you focused while learning, through plenty of aesthetic, hands-on activities alongside written content. Brilliant's courses can help anyone brush up on their STEM knowledge, whether that is a foundational understanding of algebra or calculus, or more advanced content like the introduction to neural networks. Across the site, they have thousands of lessons with new exclusive content added monthly. Learning just a little every day can have a massive impact. To get started for free, visit brilliant.org/FrancisMadden or click the link in the description, where you can also receive 20% off an annual premium subscription. Finally, the conclusion of the essay is the bow with which you tie everything together. Like the introduction, you're stating the key ideas of what you've argued, but unlike the introduction, you can afford to be a bit more technical and detailed because the reader has just read the main body of your essay and, as a result, hopefully understands what you're talking about. If we compare, for example, the conclusion of the bullying essay with the introduction, we can see I've elaborated on why exactly these things are a problem for bully victims, and I've added some directions for future research. You could argue that you shouldn't introduce any new content in the conclusion, but this is something I've actually done a couple of times, and sometimes I feel like it's a bit of extra spice. I mentioned these theories: mind blindness, executive dysfunction, and empathizing systemizing. And then in the conclusion, I have just elaborated on why these theories aren't adequate for characterizing autism. And again, I've mentioned a bit about the future. So overall, you're just restating your arguments, saying this is why I am right. So there you have it, how I wrote first class essays at Cambridge University. We've gone through the important points to planning an essay, writing an introduction, paragraphs in the main body of an essay, and writing the conclusion. A final few points, because I love incorporating some additional content into the conclusion. Perfection doesn't exist. Being a perfectionist when it comes to writing essays is always a losing battle because there's always something you could be doing better. For example, I would want to come up with the perfect plan and then write something that is perfect first time. But I think it's more important to just get your arguments down on paper before checking whether you've written in an engaging style. And I think writing in a way that's engaging comes with time. Also, my essays did get a first, but my supervisor still put lots of comments about what I could improve. So I can show you an example. So there's always additional things I can improve. I could have explained this further. I could have clarified that, and so on. Even myself, looking back at these essays now, I can see there are things that I could have done differently, but also I understand that this was more than good enough at the time. Secondly, on mark schemes, Essay mark schemes are something that I've tended to avoid because I just find them so vague, and unlike the mark scheme for a maths question, there's so much subjectivity when it comes to marking an essay. So I used to wonder why bother reading them at all. But then I noticed while I was at UCL, I needed to change of strategy because I wasn't doing too well with essays. Eventually, I had the mark scheme up while I was writing essays at UCL, and after doing this for a while, my marks actually started to improve. So if we look at the mark scheme for my undergrad essays, they talk about excellent in understanding of the subject, shown some originality and treated the evidence critically, applies relevant material from an appropriate range of sources. So bearing these criteria in mind, do go back through this video to look for examples of when I've shown these things. Important thing to note, which feeds into the perfectionism point, is a low first, which, who cares whether you get a low first or a high first? A low first would meet at least some of these criteria rather than all or virtually all of them. So another reason to kind of let go of needing everything to be perfect. Finally, on motivation. I think motivation for work is something I've struggled with a lot over time. These techniques and principles are only useful as much as we actually have the time to execute them. If you're anything like me, motivation to start work and procrastination can be a real struggle. So check out this video to see the techniques I've picked up along the way to deal with procrastination and improve my motivation.